Good morning, everyone. Today is July 3rd, 2025, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project, founded by Natalie Armstrong Motan. Every Thursday morning, Jean Lawler, David Schraga, and I are delighted to host another cutting-edge webinar for mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and everyone who negotiates. There's no charge for these great programs. Rather, we ask you to contribute to a food bank if you like what you see. And every week, one of my favorite parts of the program is when we announce the running total of just how much our generous audiences have contributed since we began the series in 2020. Jean Lawler, would you please do the honors?
With pleasure. Hello, everyone. It's great to see you. The number today of the amount of donations of which we have been told, and I always put an asterisk next to that because I'm sure there have been plenty of donations and we haven't been told about those, but the amounts of which we've been told so far total to $832,321.60, as in 60 cents. So that's probably 9-10 million meals served, depending on the buying power of a particular food bank. And that's just amazing. So thank you all so much. And let's get on with the show today. Another great speaker.
Thank you so much, Jean. And yes, let's proceed. Today we're going to hear about the secret of cross-cultural negotiations with Horacio Falcao. He's professor of management practice at the Decision Sciences Department of INSEAD in France, one of the leading business schools in the world. It's so important to learn about cross-cultural negotiations. In today's globalized business environment, Horacio writes, negotiators must navigate complex cross-cultural dynamics that shape both the process and outcome of their deals. Horacio is a professor of management practice at INSEAD, where he teaches and researches on negotiation, directs the flagship executive program Negotiation Dynamics, and co-founded and is the current academic director for the INSEAD Negotiation and Conflict Management Collaborative. His qualifications go on and on. Horacio, without further ado, please, the floor is yours. Tell us the secret of cross-cultural negotiation.
Wonderful. So thanks, Jean, Jeff, David, and Natalie for having me here. It's an honor to be working with the Will Work for Food organization in a webinar series. Let me already start saying that the secret of cross-cultural negotiation is not that secret. It's basically, I wrote the article for the Harvard Business Magazine and they decided on the title and I'm like, yeah, whatever, meaning that's your title. But in keeping the consistency with the article, which I'll provide the link later, I thought of keeping it that way. But there's no magic. There's no real secret. And it's not something that if you know and others do as well, you're worse off. On the contrary, actually, the more people know that, the better it is for everyone. Is actually just a lot of organized common sense, because common sense usually is not as common as we would like it to be. And so we need to spread a bit more the message, but it's just putting your heart out there and your ears open and just trying to truly engage with the person in front of you. If I were to argue, that is the secret. So now let me explain a bit more how to go through this. Now, in this presentation, I organize in a way that there will be a few questions. I'm not actually expecting you to answer them out loud, but what I would invite you to do is to have a pen and paper or something like that on the side, and you just commit to an answer. Because what I'll do is I'll read those questions out loud, give you a few seconds, and then I'll say what the answer is. If you just kind of put it in your mind, you're going to fool yourself into believing you chose the right one sometimes when you didn't. So if you commit on paper at the side, actually, you're going to have hopefully more of a little bit more of an insight into what you really think. And then that will hopefully also increase your learning experience today, because you will see either ideas that align a lot with what you're thinking or do not. And hopefully that will help you again to grasp more, to understand more, or maybe even to ask a few questions at the end. I'm assuming we do have some time for Q&A at the end, right? I'm working with that in mind. So yes. With that, let's jump straight in. I do have a presentation I'll walk through. And as I said, some of those will be those multiple choice questions. Where is it? I tend to have this challenge of opening way too many screens. Okay, that I found it. Let me put it out there. So hopefully everyone can see my screen right now. So let me get started. So what is a cross-cultural negotiation? So any interaction from parties of different nations, there's no such thing as a cross-cultural negotiation. Every negotiation is a cross-cultural exercise. The lenses we use to interact with the world, none of the above. So again, just commit to a letter there, just write it on your sideline. And so I'll just give a few seconds for you to commit. And the answer then that again, the answers are not the right or wrong. The answers are ones I like the most. We're talking about social science after all. But my thinking is that every negotiation is a cross-cultural exercise. When I negotiate with my wife, there is a culture exercise there. When I negotiate with my kids, there's a culture exercise there, and so forth and so on. So that's one of the things that I wanted to get us started, just to really open up a little bit more of our minds of what I'm trying to talk about here today. We're not just talking about transnational negotiations, we're also talking about transnational negotiations. So I think, just a second, I think we jumped a slide there. Let me unshare and reshare, because I think that maybe something was hidden when it was not supposed to. So sorry for that technical glitch, because there was a nice little thing to begin with there and we skipped it. What's happening? Oh, I see. Okay. Aha. Okay, sorry. By mistake, when I was moving things around, I deleted a slide. Okay. So let's get started again. Apologies, I think now we're good to go. And off we go. Okay. Thank you for your patience with me on that one. Let's continue. So this we already saw. So we already talked about that one. So this is a little other exercise now. So during a shipwreck, you can only swim and save one person. Who would you save? And let me invite you again to just put down something you believe would be helpful for you, that you believe would be true. Would you save your child, your wife, or your mother? And I know this sounds like a little bit of a gruesome exercise, but you're not going to have to tell this to anyone but to yourself. So that at least should make this safer. And again, just giving you a few seconds to think about it. You can only swim and save one person. Who would you save? And no, actually, now that you've put your letter down, let me tell you, this exercise was run a number of times with people from all over the world. And this was run in the US many times and in Japan many times at the beginning. And ultimately, what they found out is that in the US, the vast majority of people will choose the child and not so much the wife and the mother, right? But there will be a little bit of a split, like child first, wife kind of, and then mother, almost no one. When asked in Japan, actually child and wife would be a small 3% each, and the vast majority would be mother. The interesting thing is not the allocation. The interesting thing is that when I ask classes about that, a lot of classes, even without any Japanese members in it, when I ask them to say, well, why do you think, what do you think was the majority of the answers in the Japanese group? A lot of people say, oh yeah, most people will go for mother. And when then I ask why did they go for the mother, which is actually the correct answer, they usually say, oh, because they value seniors and seniority, and part even their religion is to appreciate the senior members of their family. And actually, the answer that was given by those who actually answered the question when submitted to the exercise is, no, that's not actually the reason why we chose mother. We chose mother because I can have another child, I can find a new wife, but I will only ever have one mother. What I thought that it was fascinating about this when I first heard of it was because people got it right for the wrong reasons. And that for me was a little interesting because I find that in cross-cultural negotiations, there's a lot of that going on as well. And so I just want to keep that on the back of our minds as we continue. We're not necessarily going to go back to it, but I just want that little learning going there because I think it's interesting and it colors some of what we're going to see. So what is the thing about international context versus cross-cultural? When we negotiate, there are a lot of things that influence our international negotiations. So some very hard facts are the exchange rate. You need to worry about that. International instability, we're going through a world where that's becoming significantly more relevant than 10 years ago. So you really need to worry about that. Government interventionism, we can speak about tariffs, but all sorts of other things as well. And of course, the fact that there are different political, economic, and judicial systems means that these contexts will influence how your negotiation evolves, and if there's any problem, how you're going to solve them or resolve them. And so all of these things are things that you absolutely want to consider once you're negotiating abroad or internationally. For us today, though, we're going to be focusing significantly more on this second part, which is when different cultures see things differently. And it's not an external influence or concrete objective way that impacts your negotiation from the outside. It's actually a different perception, a different view from the inside that makes it difficult at times for you to find deals where before you would think it would be easier if someone were from the same culture as you. Yeah. So one example here is something that I usually talk a lot with my students is when you are in the West, a contract is basically the end of the negotiation. The moment we sign on it, that means we negotiated and agreed. This is just an implementation plan. It's a promise to do something in a certain way. Whereas we're talking about in the East is actually the beginning of a relationship. It seems that we agreed that this will regulate the beginning of our conversations, but as our relationship evolves, we expect the contract to evolve with it. So as you can see, the concept of a contract will be vastly different from some cultures and others. And then, of course, that can create all sorts of misexpectations, and those misexpectations can lead to a lot of frustration and conflict, and of course, failed deals with that. So that's one of the reasons why we want to spend a little bit more time in thinking about cross-cultural negotiations. Now, what is culture? And if you think of it, culture is all of these things here in green. So it's something that influences our behaviors and perceptions of the world. It's shared by almost all members of a particular culture or group. It's usually learned invisibly and not necessarily going to class by socialization. You just pick it up. It distinguishes groups one and the other, and it tends to be relatively stable on time. A culture doesn't change as much. Now, there are things that are fads, right? And so that can change, but culture itself usually doesn't change that quickly. So what is it not? Well, it's not insensitive to time. It's just stable. It's not homogeneous within a group, although it distinguishes groups. Within the group, there are variances. It's not a monopoly. Not any one person or members of a group own the culture. It's not tradition only. Tradition is only a part of culture. Again, it's not uniform. Even within the same group, people can express it differently. And it's not a thing you carry or you pass it on to one another. In other words, the working definition we're going to use here is that culture is the lenses we use to interact with the world. Think about it as your operational system. As you interact with the world, there's that interface. That's your culture in a way. So what are we going to be talking about in more detail? So many of you may know of my colleague at INSEAD, Erin Meyer, who's at the very front here at the book. She published this book, The Culture Map, which became an international bestseller. It is a fantastic book. It's short, it's to the point, it's practical. It is worthy of being a bestseller. And in that book, she basically has several dimensions. And so she will say communication. Are you a high context or low context? Are you individualistic or a collectivist when making decisions? And so what people do is that they try to understand how do different countries or cultures align themselves along this spectrum. So if you say low context, high context, what's low context? You have to be very clear and specific. High context, you trust that people understand what's going on around, and you can be more ambiguous in your language. So some cultures are going to be very low context, some cultures are going to be very high context. Then when you think about individualistic or collectivist, do people make decisions alone, or they usually consult with lots of others? Let's say this is the second dimension. So some cultures will be very individualistic, some cultures will be more collectivist, and so forth and so on. So as you can see there by the color coding, some cultures will go a little bit more to the left, a little more to the right, some in the middle, and it's usually quite complicated. And it's a very interesting exercise. Usually people have a lot of aha moments, but if you think of it, most people who work internationally, they do not have the luxury of only working with one international culture. They negotiate with several. For example, just this morning, I was talking to someone from Singapore, then someone from Chile, then someone from Brazil. Now I'm here with an audience where the channel at least is mostly from the US, but we might be reaching people from all places in the world. And so I don't have the luxury of becoming an expert on any one particular industry or culture. So that's where we are different. You see, we go for the same, which is helping people manage cultures. But this here is very good for you to focus on one culture, versus here is when you have to handle many cultures in very short sequence. So if tomorrow you're going to work with one boss from a different culture, the culture map book will be great to help you understand how that boss thinks. If you're more like me, who have to deal with a lot of different people throughout a day or a week, and you don't have the time to become an expert on one particular foreign culture, then doing what we're going to be talking about here today, and this QR code is my Harvard Business Review article that I mentioned earlier today, The Secret of Cross-Cultural Negotiation. This is the image of the article. There's not a book yet. I'm actually working on it. So there you're going to have a lot of what I'm going to be discussing and sharing today if you want to have a record in writing and actually go through it a bit more in your own pace and time to be able to reflect more about some of the things we're talking about here. So with that clarification done, let's talk a little bit more about culture. And so one of the things that I like to discuss is that I tend to tell people that they tend to both overestimate and underestimate culture at the same time. I used to have a classmate in high school. His name is Guilherme, but let's call him William because that's the translation of his name into English. So William used to sit spot in the middle of the classroom. So all the little desks, we were about 20 people or so, 22, and he was spot in the middle. And so it was an only boys school. It was a Catholic school. And at some point, we decided only boys, like we would do all sorts of weird things as boys, right? Like very rowdy group. Then eventually we decided, okay, among ourselves, we all agreed that whenever we do something wrong, when the professors or the deans or others come to us saying, who did this? Everyone will point to the middle of the classroom and say, William did it. Right? Now notice, it's not that we didn't like William. He just sat in the middle of the class. We just thought it would be funny. Now, at first, William hated it because every time at the beginning that there was something wrong, and there were many, we would kind of point out to him. And at first, of course, he actually took a lot of heat from the leadership of the school. But shortly after, every time we were asked, who did this? When we point to William, the leadership's like, yeah, we already know your little trick that every time is William. So suddenly William realized he had a free pass to do anything he wanted. And when people said it's William's fault, no one would believe it. It's the opposite of the cry wolf. He actually benefited from being the wolf in that situation. And so why am I sharing that? It's because normally what happens in many negotiations is that we tend to overly blame nationality whenever there is a problem between two people from different countries negotiating. And we tend to then overestimate the fact that nationality is the culture that matters. And hopefully by this slide now, what I'm trying to show you is that there are all these other cultures that matter, and all these other cultures will impact how people negotiate. If a lawyer and an economist negotiate, the lawyer is always looking for fairness, the economist is looking for efficiency. That value system difference will generate conflict, will make it harder for them to get a solution. Religion, age, gender. Well, the gender debate right now, the diversity debate is right out there in the top 3 of the agenda of most people. And that actually shows how important it is for people to actually to get along and find solutions when they disagree on something. The research is vast on that field as well. And that's where we underestimate culture. So we tend to overestimate nationality, and we tend to underestimate all other cultures. And so what I'm trying to bring here for us is to try to appreciate a bit more how all of these cultures are relevant when we're talking about cross-cultural negotiations. For example, I work at INSEAD. I lived for 17 years in Singapore. I am American Brazilian. I was actually born in the US, but raised in Brazil. Now, I live in Switzerland, but work in Abu Dhabi. I know, a mess. When I spent 17 years in Singapore, there were colleagues of mine who had a very different profile than mine, culturally speaking, from a nationality perspective. And yet, we were both highly educated, academics, interested in similar topics. We had a lot more in common than I have with many more people in Brazil. We were similar religions, or maybe not. We were similar ages, or maybe not. We were similar genders, or maybe not. But there were so many more points of contact that allowed us to communicate in much easier ways than I have sometimes even with my mom or my brothers or my dad, which are the same blood, same genetics in many ways, but still, because of the other cultures, we might not actually get along in having successful conversations as often as we would expect. So, with that point made, let's move on to our next point. Does the cross-cultural part of any negotiation makes negotiation harder? So try to see if you can commit to an answer there. Yes, yes, but they do not need to be. Sometimes it depends. No, but they can be, and no, period. What is your answer? Just commit to something for your own learning. Okay, and so the answer is a pure yes. Done. Meaning, while pretty much every negotiation is a cross-cultural exercise, that dimension of the negotiation does create challenge and is something for us to be aware of. For example, if there's plenty of research advocating that whenever there is more of a difference in culture, what happens is that there's a bigger communication gap. What I say might not be what you understand, and what you understand might not be what I say. And the further away we are, the more likely are that we have different experiences and a different mental library. And therefore, when I say A, you may understand something completely different. When I say elephant, you're not seeing the same elephant I say. You might be seeing a completely different elephant. And so that distance will actually be much more produced if we have that bigger cultural distance in many different dimensions. The more dimensions we are culturally distant, the harder it will be for us to understand each other. So negotiations will become more difficult and protracted. We will have to take more time. We will actually reach more impasses or failure as opposed to successes. If we do succeed, there's a likelihood that there will be a stronger suboptimal outcome. And we're much more likely to have frustration or conflict because we're so much used to the smooth conversations with people who are more like us that when we have this less smooth, we tend to feel that not only one is their fault, but it does generate frustration because we're not managing to communicate as easy as we're used to. And so, of course, you can see here that there are relationship problems, there are procedural problems, there are outcome problems, there are all sorts of problems. So this is really something we need to work on. And hopefully by the end of this little session, you will have a few tools to try to reduce that as a problem and get negotiations with cross-cultural dynamics in much better shape than hopefully you do now. So, how many negotiation cultures are out there? There's only one negotiation culture out there. There are 2, there are 10, there are 257, or there's infinite. So, what do you think is the answer? Commit. Choose a letter. And the answer is 2. And I know this might sound a little weird because I just said that every negotiation is a cross-cultural exercise and everything else, but I want to call your attention to the word negotiation culture. How many negotiation cultures are there? Which is a different way of saying how many negotiation strategies are out there. And basically, there are 2 main strategies. And you probably already see where I'm going with that, but mostly the negotiation strategies are, there's a more competitive strategy or win-lose. Yeah, like to quote here our famous Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. Competitive and win-lose strategies usually rely a lot on power. I'm not going to read this table for you. Most of you already know what I'm talking about. This is a negotiation channel, so most of you are fairly well educated on basic negotiation theory. But the table on the black, gray, and white table there is mostly to share a bit of that competitive win-lose dynamic, and the more colorful blue, red and purple, or lavender if you want. On the right side is more of the collaborative and win-win, where we take more responsibility to create value, right? And so I separate the power and the responsibility to some extent and try to help you understand when people negotiate across cultures, it doesn't matter as much what their other cultures are, the religious culture, the age culture, the nationality culture. What truly matters is what negotiation culture or strategy are they applying right now. And the reason why I'm calling attention to that because a lot of the other stuff can become just noise or smoke. And the point that we are trying to make is that you should try to cut across that as fast as you can to get to the core of it, which is this person, is the counterparty trying to be my ally, or is my counterparty here open to being my enemy? That's the main question in every negotiation, and it continues to be in cross-cultural negotiations. So it goes along the lines of the following. Where there is a will, there's a way. So if you are my ally, there is a will. And if there is a will, if I go back a few slides, you're going to see it becomes easier to handle all these spheres. It might still take a little bit more time, but ultimately there is a will. So I should be a little happier if I can find out as early as possible that you are actually playing the win-win camp. And so a lot of what we're going to be trying to look into in this model is to try to help you cut across that cross-cultural noise to get to that core, that are they an ally, and then can I find a way, as opposed to are they enemies, in which case it doesn't matter where the culture is. It's going to be a harder negotiation anyhow. And then most other advice on how to handle people who do win-lose applies to that as well. So with that, let's continue. Another question. So given all of that I'm saying now, so are we similar, mostly similar, half different, mostly different, or different? Commit to an answer, please. And the answer is, this might be surprising to some after all the different cultures and things like that, and say, well, I would argue that they were mostly similar and almost here, in between A and B. And let me show you why. So how similar or different are we really? And if we think about it, we are 96 to 97% similar, genetically similar to great apes, right? To an orangutan or the likes. We're actually 80% similar to a cow when we think in terms of genetics. Like we're 50 or 60%, I'm forgetting now, similar to a fruit fly when it comes to genetics. It's insane how similar we are. And yet, if we think that we're this similar to the great apes, actually we don't think, we know, we are much similar, we're much closer to one another, probably on the 99 to higher between humans. We tend to focus on the differences. Why are we focusing on the differences? Why are we focusing on the 1%? Oh, because the 1% creates the problem. Agreed. The 1% creates a problem, but the 99% holds the solution. The Dalai Lama says everyone is looking for more pleasure and less pain. Why are we not operating on that human level? Why are we focusing so much? All those different dimensions and all these different things. Why are we not just bringing that human aspect to it and try to focus on these similarities? That's what allows me to negotiate all over the world, to live in Switzerland and Abu Dhabi, work in Singapore. Like tomorrow I'm driving to France. It's just all over. The only way you can do that is to go to that common platform, because I cannot keep reinventing myself every time I talk to someone else. I need to go to that one part that is common so I can develop a strong and robust way of negotiating with others that I can apply almost without any change from one person to the next. And yet we are a little bit different. But should I then rely on stereotypes to see where the differences are? And so now let's also see here. Should A, every negotiation, though it matters how and when. B, yes, but not every time. C, rarely as they can backfire. D, no, never. Or 3, none at all. Or none of the above, sorry. So what would be your answer? Commit. And the answer is, again, you may be surprised a bit, this here. Although, let me create a caveat. The word stereotype in academia has a better version, which is called a prototype. And so maybe that was a little bit of a tricky question, and I apologize if that's how it came out. I didn't mean it that way, but it's an opportunity to explain the difference between stereotype and prototype. And with stereotype is more the popular, not data-driven way of looking at another culture, sometimes even with some element of ridicule that you can play it on. So that's, of course, we would argue no, never. We don't want to go for stereotypes. But oftentimes what we have is a version of stereotypes, but some of it is a little bit more data-driven, and that actually talks about the average of a culture. So one could argue that on average, Brazilians are more informal than Japanese, right? I think very few people would argue that on average. And so that is a little bit of that's a prototype. For many people, it will come across as a stereotype. Oh, you shouldn't stereotype. Some Japanese might be very informal, actually pretty crazy and rebel. Yes, of course, but that's the whole normal distribution of things. That's why then we talk about more prototypes. So I wanted you to take away the idea of, should I rely on stereotypes? No, because those are dangerous. But should I rely on prototypes? Yes. Insofar as something that's a bit more scientific based and there's data behind it, it will give you some information about other cultures that will help you understand where some of the differences might be. And that is not unhelpful. And that's why, for example, the book of Erin Meyer, the culture map, has made a lot of success because it does play a bit from those prototypes. She plays on a lot of data. She shares the average of certain cultures, and that gives you a gauge of what you might find on the other side of the table. But of course, this always has to be done together with an exercise of individualization. Oh, that was a big word. Okay. Of individualization, which means you're really trying to pay attention to the person in front of you and trying to adjust from that average, because sometimes you're going to have to move a lot, especially if that person has a lot more deviance from their own culture or if they lived in other countries for too long. But how much and where are we expecting the difference? So this here is a picture that I took of the natural diet of indigenous American people, in the north of the Americas, right? So North America, indigenous people. And if you look into it, when we think about people being very different, okay, so maybe I don't eat all of those every day, but I see nothing on this plate that I will go, I don't eat that. And that goes to reinforce the point that while there are differences, how much, not that much, and where? Well, maybe it's not so much on what we eat, but how we eat, how much of each we eat. And hopefully, I'm not talking only about eating, I'm talking about every habit that we have. It's not so much on we do vastly different things. We have most of the same. We sleep, we eat, we want to be successful, we want to make money, we want to impress people around us, we don't want to lose, we don't want to look stupid, we don't want to be betrayed. Notice a lot of what we're looking for in negotiations is very much the same. Now, we might prioritize things slightly different here and there. I might like more one kind of food. You might like more the other kind of food. I'm more of a savory guy. Actually, I'm cheating. I'm a sweet guy. Some of you are probably more savory, so forth and so on. And so what I'm trying to show you is that a lot of those differences, again, are on the nuances. And so where and how are we different? And so we're different in three main ways that I want to call your attention to. Okay. And I already hinted at least a couple of those, and now we're going to talk about them into more details. So if you were to think about what is the core, this is the 7 elements that Roger Fisher and William Ury and Bruce Patton talk about in the Getting to Yes book. Right. So if you're acquainted with that model, you're going to see the words here. You're probably going to recognize all of them: interest, options, legitimacy, alternatives with the BATNA thing that most people probably heard of, and so forth and so on. And if you think about this framework, it's separated in 3 main phases. There's a first phase, which is usually called the bridge phase, where we connect 2 or more people. Then there's the second phase, which is the circle. You may know those by different names, yes, but hopefully we're communicating well, the circle of value. And then there's the third part, which is the decision phase. Now, what are these 3 things here? Let's call them A, B, and C. This is the core of my cross-cultural framework, to make it as simple as possible. The first one is what I mentioned when we talked about Spider-Man a few slides back. Are you my ally or my friend? In other words, is your intention to be here to make a deal with me, or your intention here to use your power, your ability to walk away to put pressure on me? Of course, both want to make a deal with me, but one is trying to find ways to commit. The other one is trying to leverage their power, their alternatives, their BATNA maybe, to then push me into a commitment that is only good for them, or at least much more favorable for them than for me. So that's the one I said before. Let's cut through the noise. Let's cut through the fog and the smoke and try to get as quickly as we can to the intention. So while this is the C, I would argue this is the first thing we're worrying about in a cross-cultural negotiation. Start with the end in mind. Start with the intention in mind. See where people want to end up and see if that's similar to you. Again, but it's not in terms of content. I hope that's becoming very clear. It's in terms of attitude and behavior. Then the second thing is the rituals. When we try to build a bridge, meaning building relationships and building a communication process, these things tend to differ quite a bit from culture to culture. How people build relationships, how people talk, how people make decisions, all of those. And that's things like the culture map, or even other authors like Hofstede, Trompe-Mars, Lewis, along the lines of Mayer that I mentioned before, they pay too much attention to that and to that alone. What I'm trying to bring forward here, rituals, is how do you build relationship? How do I build relationship? For example, when I first went to the US, people are like, oh, let's go to a baseball game. I'm like, why? It's slow. I don't understand. I'm from Brazil, meaning at least culturally speaking, it's like people are running all the time. In baseball, they barely run. They do a quick sprint and that's it. Meaning, where's the fun in that? And eventually I realized that staying in a baseball game gives you enormous opportunities to talk, exactly because there's this kind of different pace to the game. And this is a fantastic way for you to get to know each other while doing something, right? And so there are all sorts of other experiences that I had as well when I was there. And I started to learn how to appreciate some of the US ways in which I was invited to build a relationship. Of course, I'm not saying that everyone does that, but that was a particular one that I was invited to do. Given I was in Boston, Red Sox, you know how people are fanatic about it, Red Sox Nation and all of that, right? And so that's the thing that I want to say. So the rituals is something that is important and you cannot deny it. And there is a bigger chance that things will be different there. They're less important than the intentions, because the intentions is it's like people are going to behave in a certain way. Rituals are people are used to behaving in a certain way, but that's just because they're used to. If you were to invite them to do something slightly different, most people with a good intention, the intention to work with you, they will find a way. And then the third part is where the differences are not a negative that you have to overcome, but rather a negative that you can leverage to create more value and expand the pie. And so the priorities here will help you allocate value in different ways, where normally people who are talking win-win already think about that anyhow. In cross-cultural negotiation, there are usually so many more opportunities for you to do that, that I would invite you to pay much more attention, because then this will help you then also improve the other two, although it comes later. So usually this will be the second, and then this will be the third, if you're thinking timeline in a negotiation, okay? So timeline. I hope this is making sense. I hope this is being helpful and useful so far. Let's continue. So this is just because I like to throw the 7 elements there. So let's talk about the rituals. And so when it comes to rituals, there are a couple of papers that talk about, they make metaphors of coconut and peach culture. So I made an example of Japanese and Brazilians before. So the Japanese are known as the coconut culture, Brazilians are known as the peach culture. And what are those analogies for? If you think about it, the shell of a coconut is extremely hard. That's the public face. You can get to know the face of a Japanese very quickly, professionally speaking. But for you to get through that is so hard. You require a lot of time and energy. Then there's a second part there, in the case of coconut, the fruit, which is also pretty thick, meaning it's, of course, you can bite it well, but it's not something you can just easily go through. That's you getting into the private space. And then there's the third part, where is the intimate space, and that's just water. In other words, if you manage to break through the first one, then the second is easier, then the third is easy. But it means that you put a lot of energy up front. If you see cultures like Brazil, is the absolute opposite. The skin of a peach is less than paper thin. You get through that one very quickly. There's actually the state I come from, Rio de Janeiro, the city. It's very funny. There's something that even, there's a saying that said, oh, that's a carioca. Carioca is a native of the Rio de Janeiro city. It's a carioca invitations. When you see someone say, hey, so great to see you. Oh, yes. Oh, love to get together. Why don't you come tonight for dinner? And then you leave. And they never gave you an address. They never gave you a time. They never actually gave you any means for you to actually show up tonight for dinner. It was just a nicety said. I like you so much, I would invite you for dinner one day, but not today, right? And so, but the idea is that if you get that feeling that the public sphere became informal really quickly, and very quickly just people are like, yeah, let's get together. And this seems very easy. And then once you go into the private sphere, is the peach. Also very soft, very to go through, a little bit harder than the public. But then you look at the peach seed, and that's almost impenetrable. And that's the point. Most people in a culture like Brazil, they are born, bred, raised, and died in the same city. They have their families, they have their childhood friends. They are not interested necessarily in more friends. They already have more than 1,000. They have weddings of 2, 3, 5, 700 people. They don't need an expat that just arrived there saying, let's make friends. Yeah, they'll make friends, but you're never going to get into that sphere. Meaning, never, of course, is always an exaggeration, but it's just to show. So it's easy to start, but if you want to get the extra mile, then it becomes very hard. The opposite of the Japanese-like cultures. So this is just for you to get a sense of, okay, what kind of culture is that and how easy it is to build relationships and build rituals around it. And then the relationship is usually because you're trying to build trust. And so how do you do it? And so here there are some ideas for you to discuss. The ideas that you should define, you should negotiate with one another the desired relationship. You should actually make a topic of conversation. And you should say, okay, we are from very different cultures. We should be discussing what we're looking for in a relationship. Are we looking to build trust? How much trust? How much effort and investment we're willing to put? I've actually worked once with a client. They were actually not that far out, if you think, in terms of geography. One was Swiss, one was Spanish, 2 teams, but very different cultures. One was the Germanic Swiss, not the French Swiss, and the other one was the Latin Spanish. And they went into an exercise that they then called the hoja de ruta, right? Think about it as our path, our own map for our own, how we're going to develop our own relationship and our own way of negotiating. What are we going to do? What behaviors we expect from one another? And so they actually came up with 5 behaviors that they were expecting from one another that they acknowledged would help them build trust with one another. Now, given this was a negotiation that was expected to take a whole year, if not 2, and so they devoted 1 or 2 meetings just for that. A lot of international negotiations deal with a lot of value as well, so that might be a worthy investment. Oh, it's only a 1-hour conversation. Well, then just have 1 or 2 questions. How do you like to deal with someone who's foreigner? How have you experienced building relationship with foreigners, and how do you like to do it? Just ask 1 or 2 questions like that. Because here's one of the things that we need to be very conscious about. For example, I went to a conference once in South Korea where there was a panel saying how East Asians, how should East Asians learn how to build trust? And that's what captivated my attention, without alcohol. And I never thought I was going to see such a panel in a conference, in an academic conference. And basically the professor gentleman, who then we became friends since then, he told a story of a negotiation where he had to help out, where the city of Seoul was going through a massive reurbanization project. And there were a lot of very old, poor houses in the space that the government wanted to redevelop into a beautiful park. They then actually hired a team of about 20 to 25 professional negotiators who went door by door negotiating to buy that little property. Every time they would actually have a negotiation, they would drink a bit of soju. Within 3 months, about 10 to 12 members of the team had to go to the hospital with liver problems because they were closing several deals a day. Notice the whole thing about the soju, the liquor from South Korea, is that in the past, traders would walk months to one another city. When they closed the deal, was the deal of the day or the deal of the week. So, of course, celebrating with soju was okay. Once we have a new pace of business, we have to reinvent a bit how to develop relationships. For example, I don't drink alcohol, or barely at all. Maybe my father's birthday celebration or something like that. It's not religious, just that I don't like it. And so going and doing a lot of business in Asia, as I used to do, everyone would go, oh, let's go to karaoke, let's go drinking tonight. I'm like, I'll go to karaoke, I'm not drinking. And you're like, oh, because they were expected the drink will reduce your mask and you will show more of your true self. So I just showed them that I was willing to show my true self, make fun of myself when I was singing and things like that, so that they start trusting me more. Or we invited ourselves to do other things that was not the karaoke and drinking, that we felt comfortable actually having that conversation. So we created a third ritual, not my ritual, not your ritual, but a third ritual where we both felt, okay, this will work for both of us. When it comes to the procedural part of the rituals, some people are on time, some people are late. I actually arrived just in time today, and I can imagine that my American colleagues were thinking, why did we call a Brazilian? He's going to be late again, right? Not that we ever interacted before. Again, like Brazilians normally are later on average, Latin cultures do. And so when you're dealing with cross-culture, talking about the time expectations is important. Are we going to go through problems, Or are we going to go around problems? Are we going to make decisions alone or in collectives? Are we going to go and straight to the point, or do we dance around the issues because we're concerned also about social harmony? All of these things are things that should be discussed explicitly at the beginning. Those were also part of that hoja de ruta that I mentioned these two clients of mine actually putting together. And so have those conversations. There are several manuals on where things might differ. And so having these conversations can help you, again, for the bigger ones. Then we talk about preference. We can go from positions to interest. So I'm going to assume that most people here know the orange story. For those who don't know, two sisters fighting over the last orange in the house. The mom sees the two sisters fighting, splits the orange in half, gives half to one sister, the other half to the other. So the older sister goes to her corner, peels half the orange. Younger sister goes to her corner, peels half the orange, eats half the fruit, throws away half the peel. The older sister goes to her corner, throws away half the fruit, and with half the peel makes half a recipe of an orange cake. Right? A very famous, it's in the Getting to Yes book, story on how to differentiate positions to interest. Now, here's where it got interesting to me. I was telling the story once in a basic negotiation workshop, and I told the story, but I told it with this particular twist. I said, and then the younger sister picked the orange, and the older sister took it away from her, and then the fight started. I don't know why I said it that way. I think it's just for people to visualize more what was going on. And then as soon as I said that, two hands went up. A lady from Sweden and an older gentleman from China. And the lady from Sweden, she raised her hand first, and I'm like, okay, you go first. And she goes, the orange should stay with the younger sister, before she gave the punchline. And I'm like, why? And she said, well, meritocracy, first come, first serve. Younger sister got the orange first, it's first. The gentleman in China could not contain himself, despite being an extremely polite gentleman. And he's like, no, you're so wrong. The orange should go to the older sister. Because seniority, the older sister, being senior, would not abuse of her seniority rights and would not take the orange from the younger sister unless she had a good reason to do it. So she should take the orange. And that was fascinating to me, because if we were to just go to legitimacy, which again is a very strong cross-cultural element because it deals with people's values, and values tend to differ more from culture to culture, we would have had a big fight between these two people. But then as we look into the punchline and understanding that interests and priorities dominate legitimacy and preference and positions, then we had the fruit peel, then they would be able to both be happy. But if we go one step further, why not actually invite both of them to bake the cake together, share the orange meanwhile, bake the cake, and then actually eat even more or sell the cake, buy more oranges, and create a cake baking empire. Something I normally say in my class that I know it's an exaggeration, but it goes to show the possibilities. Once you start thinking in terms of preferences, then suddenly you move from positions to legitimacy. But legitimacy, people can be positional on legitimacy because it's about their values. And that's why we see those intractable religious and other negotiations. So we don't want that. This is a little bit better, but if people are going to do the positional part, that's also not good. So the beauty of looking at priorities or preferences is that it truly enables us to go into the value creation aspect. When we come to our third, right, rituals, preferences, intentions. When we come to our third, this is the ladder of inference idea. What I want to share with you is the idea that we normally talk at a very high level of conclusion, as opposed to the idea of understanding data. What's the data? And so we both should be going down, and I would argue here, similarly, we should be going to the element of intention, okay? Whereas here, it's just more what? The behaviors. And so one of the things that I like to share, and the idea is that, for me at least, one of the things that we see is that we see a lot of people saying, oh, we need to translate the words. But the words are less important than the behaviors behind it. Actions speak louder than words. And behind the behaviors is the intentions. And so what I would like to invite you to do next time you go negotiate, seriously think about translation. But don't think about just translation from their words to their words. Go deeper, all the way to the intentions, and try to understand, is that person, again, try to work with me or against me? Right? Like the Rosetta Stone, there were 3 different languages being used. And that allowed people to understand one another when you translate the words. Of course, that is important. But understanding one another's intentions help you understand where to go, even if the words sometimes are not making sense, even if the rituals and preferences are not that clear. And so that's why I reinforced the idea that that's where you want to focus on first. So we're getting to the end. Should I adapt? Please commit to a letter. Yes, often, sometimes yes, sometimes no, rarely, never if I can avoid it. What do you think is the answer? And by now you might be getting my style of questions and answers, so hopefully you're going to get closer to right. And the answer here is this. Why? Adapting means playing on their home court, away from yours, which means you're now having to worry about negotiating well and being in their home turf, which comes with all sorts of cognitive overloads, which will reduce your ability to negotiate at your best. So if you can avoid adapting, I'm not saying adjusting. Adjusting is fun. Adapting means like you in Rome, like the Romans. That's an extremely dangerous thing to do. And let me see if I can help you see this a little bit better. There was a research, which is very rare to find, where people analyzed three cultures: Japanese, Americans, and Brazilians. Brazilians are usually not included in a lot of research at an academic international level. But this one was, which was interesting, of course, for me, and it dealt with a topic that is of my interest as well. So in Rome, like the Romans, should you behave in Rome like the Romans? And the answer is probably not. Because if you look at this research here, they ask people, how many minutes do you go silent in a negotiation of 10? Japanese will go almost half of the time quiet, listening and pay attention. Brazilians were seen to go 0 minutes quiet. That's why I became a professor. We just need to talk. We don't need to listen. Right? Then the other part is eye contact. Japanese, and the Americans are in the middle, so I'm just kind of skipping it for the sake of time, yeah? Japanese will look at each other's eyes for 1.3 minutes because to some extent that's actually seen as aggressive and intimidating. Brazilians will go almost half the time, that's again 10 minutes, looking at each other's eyes, because in Brazil, we constantly hear from our parents, oi, oi, eyes on me, oi, eyes on me. Eyes on me is showing you're paying attention to me. Eyes on me is a show of respect. So while here, Japanese show respect by going quiet, here, the Brazilians show respect by looking at you in the eyes. It's not intimidation. It's not a scare tactic. It's just how they show respect. But again, in the same way, we could argue, wait a minute, do Brazilians really go 0? Okay, we do talk over each other quite a bit. I get that. I'm still at fault of that today, even being away from Brazil for over 25 years. But we do listen. And there are a few moments of silence, although they are few. But if maybe they discounted it because they counted the time where we were talking over each other. And the last one is the most interesting of the three, where is how many times will someone say no in 30 minutes of negotiation? The Japanese will say no 5.7 times, or things that sound like no. Remember, they're more indirect when they speak. Americans will say no or something similar to no about 9 times. And Brazilians will say 83.4. Now, it's almost impossible to imagine that in 30 minutes, there are 83.4 reasons to say no to something. And here's what I then went into the data and I looked at it. And you could see the poor, I'm assuming, research associate just marking the times that no was said in a meeting. And Brazilians have something where if someone said something very obvious, the Brazilian will agree to you by saying, no, don't even bother about it. Of course, we're going to do it. So I could see the poor research associate going, no. Of course, the no always meant don't bother. Of course, we're doing. So a lot of these no's here are actually yeses. Why am I showing you this? Be very careful to try to be a Roman in Rome, because you can't. As we can see here, you can't do it well enough. Unless what? Unless you lived in this culture for a while and you have been acculturated to it, or you are married to someone from that culture and you've learned enough about it, but there's still going to be a cognitive overload that will reduce your ability to negotiate. And so, takeaways now. How do you negotiate cross-cultural? Should you adapt to the other side? And already said, no, you should not do that, right? Should you have them adapt to your culture? No, because then you're forcing them into the same trap you're trying to avoid yourself. I think that's an aggressive strategy that I usually don't recommend. Should you compromise and both half adapt? I also don't recommend that, because you're both working with one eye open. You're both kind of doing half of what you can. Therefore, should you just stay where you are and avoid each other? No, you shouldn't do that either, because then you're ignoring all the cultural gaps that you have among yourselves. So that's why these are called rigid strategies. What we should be doing is not changing everything, not a lot different, but we should be doing a few things different. We should be adjusting a bit, but we should be doing rationally And so how do we do it? So imagine that the lady in blue there is their culture. How should we approach? We should do what's called alternating if we have a high sense of comfort with the other culture. So for example, I lived in Singapore for 17 years. I feel very comfortable acting Singaporean sometimes. Even though I lived a bit in a bubble, I feel comfortable kind of going back and forth. So sometimes I play for my culture. Sometimes I kind of meet halfway. I say, well, in your country, you do this. In mine, I do that to represent the same. Is that okay? And sometimes I will just do what a Singaporean will do. And I will do all three to help people feel comfortable and to minimize the cultural gaps. If I have a medium, maybe I did an exchange program for a year, or I'm very curious about that culture, or I know a few more facts, or I studied a bit more, I might go halfway, but I'm not going to pretend to go all the way. And if I have very low sense of comfort with the other culture, then I'm actually going to stay put more, and I'm going to invite a third person to broker the two of us. Call it a translator, call it a cultural translator, if you may. Could be a language or cultural. That's actually how I use even a language translator, to be a little bit of a cultural translator. It could be also a teammate who actually is someone who's comfortable with adapting or reframing, and that person can also be the bridge. And if we don't have that, we might invite someone from the other team to do it. Why is it important for you to not necessarily go all the way? Because even this person here, sometimes you need to be careful not to only be here, and sometimes do that and that, because one of the things we want to keep is a sense of cultural slack. If you start looking too much like the other culture, they will start expecting you that you're a perfect representative of that culture. And you need to remind them every now and then you're not. For example, if I go to the US, some people will have a hard time picturing my accent. They might think I'm from a different state and not from a different country, which is a nice praise because, yeah, English is my second language. And so if I start acting too American for too long, people are going to expect me to then act everything American. And if I then don't, they will read too much into it as is, ooh, what was his intention there? Where maybe it was just a cultural mistake. So I would invite you to never stay just there if it's not your culture. Every now and then, even strategically, retreat back into the middle of yours to remind people, I'm not from your culture, I'm making an effort. So give me that cultural slack if I make a mistake. So this is the summary. When you're trying to negotiate, the idea is to understand, prepare, and adjust, not adapt. Negotiate your desired trust level. Negotiate what you believe to be a joint and fair process. And collaborate by leveraging preferences to create more value. So this is just a summary. I'll give you the slides later, but it basically just says what we said here for all of you. So with that, this is some other content that I will provide to you later. An article I just wrote on how to negotiate with Trump and win with a colleague. My new book on pharmaceutical negotiations that just came out last week, and negotiation on AI, and a couple of other initiatives that I'll share with you later when I provide the slides more fully. So that's what I wanted to share. It took me a little longer. I'm sorry. It's actually just time. I'm actually quite impressed as a Brazilian to finish anything on time, given the cultural aspect. I'm glad to stay a few more minutes to answer questions if it's allowed and if you would like to.
Professor Horacio Falcao, thank you so much. This was tremendous. So much to think about. Really a very stimulating presentation. If people have to leave now, we understand that entirely. For those who wish to stay for a few minutes and pose some questions, we welcome that. You can either put your question into the chat or just unmute yourself and ask away, please.
Well, I'll jump in with one question. Professor, you spoke about how there's really only two negotiation strategies, the competitive versus collaborative. You talked about understanding the different cultures that go into that. What are your thoughts on the ability to bridge a gap between those two strategies, or to bring the parties more into a central point where they can reach agreement? Do you adapt to the other side's strategy? Do you just understand what it is and just adjust to that?
So I'm not a big fan of adapting. And unfortunately, David, right?
Yes.
Unfortunately, David, it would be hard for me to answer your question as I would like to, because I teach a full course on how to help people who want to do win-win to get those who do win-lose away from just staying there on that competitive dimension. It's a difficult skill to build because you're basically trying to deal with someone who's trying to take advantage of you, and you're trying to make sure that they actually don't succeed in taking advantage of you, and if possible, to even start converting that into more collaborative or at least a non-effective competitive dimension. And so there are all sorts of strategies that go about that. But I would argue that those are the two main things I would do. Either I would try to show the competitive that their competitive moves are not going to be effective in succeeding. And I would then try to add another layer was saying, if you then try to collaborate with me, if you just try, on average, the research and the practice attest to that in many places, on average, you're likely to succeed more because I am not likely to resist you. I'm more likely to work with you. And that usually leads to better solutions. Would you like to give it a try? So showing that the competition, the aggressive win-lose moves are not working, and inviting them into a win-win experiment with me with a promise that there will be potentially, I can't promise there will be, right? We don't control the future, more value at the end of the day. That's my really short, sorry, answer for that. I wish I could do more.
Very helpful.
Thank you, David. We have a couple
Karama,
names. Yeah.
Karama Neal, would you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you so much. Very much appreciated this presentation. Very, very helpful. I was trying to take notes and I missed the fourth rigid strategy. You missed into adapting, imposing, and compromising. And there was a fourth one that I just didn't get it done before you.
If I'm not mistaken, is isolate. Let me see if it's the right word. Avoid. Same. Avoid or isolate.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Please. That's why we're here.
Thank you. Tina Jones, your question, please. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you for this insightful presentation. I'm fascinated, and I see the correlation with adapting versus adjusting. My question is, where does empathy fit on the difference chart? Because I'm thinking it should be with communication, but I just want to check in.
Yeah, so empathy is usually having the ability to appreciate at an emotional level the emotions of your counterparty, which is different from understanding, where it's the cognitive appreciation of where they are. So that element of empathy is usually in negotiation theory, as far as I understand, the principal negotiation theory, and then my evolution of it, the value negotiation theory, is in the relationship element, because we're trying to connect with emotions which reside in the relationship component of a negotiation.
Thank you.
Answer the question. Is that what?
Yes, that's what I wanted to know, where it fits.
Exactly. You're very welcome.
Okay, Timothy Olson, your question, please.
Oh yes, this is awesome. In United States society, where we in general share so much in common culturally, yet are able to get so heavily divided on some perception of political differences. How's that possible?
So, yeah, not taking easy on me on that one.
Next seminar.
No, I love the question. I love the question. Absolutely do. So, for me, if we were to connect with today's material, I would argue is that on that element of intention. What I see a lot in political debates, and I actually was thinking the other day, just earlier today, I have a group of my classmates from my MBA from all over the world, and there is a person there who is always saying, no, if you don't believe in that, you're an idiot, and things like that. And while that person is arguing a lot of the dominant speech of today, which is illuminated and open and all, the way that person is doing it is preventing anyone else of even arguing an opposite point of view. And so what I find is that a lot of times what's happening in the political debate that is creating a lot of division is that people are starting to believe I am right and I'm the only good person in the room. And the other person is wrong and they are evil. And that association of intentions is preventing people from building any bridge, appreciating that people on the other side, they might have a different understanding. They don't necessarily have a different intention. Both of us might actually want a better society, people having more love and appreciation and opportunities and gains, and others is just usually we diverge of how to get there because life is complex and different people have different strengths and weaknesses. And of course, some paths will be easier for some people, some paths will be easier for other people. And so, of course, there is all that divergence and all that fact that we are limited by our own experiences, so we don't see. But if I were then now to distill and keep it short, I would go back to that element of intention. I think that from the material of today to apply where you're talking about is just to help people understand as early as possible, bring the conversation to the intention. I assume you're coming with a good intention because you want to put forward the ideas you believe that will make everyone better off. I hope you can give me the benefit of the doubt or the principle of charity, that I also harbor good intentions. I just see things differently. And I think that the debate will make both of us better off, even if we end up not agreeing. Yeah, that's how I try to introduce conversations when I see that there's this big divide for political or other reasons. I hope that connects. I know there's,
Horacio, let me,
yeah,
go ahead.
please go ahead.
Go
Jeff.
ahead.
I was just
Well-
going to suggest the process, but please go ahead. You're the
No,
facilitator.
please, go, you continue.
There are a few
Please.
questions on the chat. So how would you like to go about at least some of those? Do you want
Let's
to pick
take-
them up and pick one or two? Because I have maybe 5-6 more minutes and then I probably have to go.
Well, there's one question. Harry Truman Moore asks, is there actually a way to negotiate with Trump? Why don't you take that one?
Well, I wrote an article. If you go to my LinkedIn, Horacio Falcao, it's one of my latest posts on how to negotiate with Trump and win. And when I say win, I don't mean beat him, but actually get what you want. Right now, Trump has a combination of factors that makes him one of the most powerful negotiators in the world. Like just sitting on the POTUS chair makes him extremely powerful and difficult to handle. Plus the fact that not only he's sitting in that chair, he has massive dominance on the main institutions, right? The House of Representatives, Senate, etc. And so that means that he's in a very, very powerful place. And therefore, negotiating with someone with that much power and a hard bargain approach, which is the approach that Trump adopts, is extremely difficult. And so, unfortunately, what we see is that a lot of people are making a lot of mistakes because a lot of people think that they should they're calling Trump a bully as opposed to a hard bargainer. A bully is someone who is much more doing the act just for the sake of the act. The hard bargainer does some moves that are very similar to the bully, like bombing Iran, right? It sounds like a bully move, but it has a strategic negotiation component. The bombing of the Iranian facilities was to diminish the BACNA, the alternative of Iran, in a negotiation, so that when the U.S. returned to the negotiations with Iran, Iran had less of a BACNA to walk away from or to put pressure on the U.S. And so that more deliberate aspect of the moves from Trump would allow people to understand more rationally, why is he doing these things that sometimes seem irrational? So, for example, even the fact that he made the threat for 2 weeks and then bombed in some of the very first days of that window was to rescue a bit his image of a little bit of the mad dog, because the hard bargainer thrives on unpredictability to keep the other person guessing and afraid. Whereas recently people have been talking about Trump as taco, right? The meaning Trump always chickens out. Meaning people are seeing him make a lot of threats and not follow through on them. And so he picked a big one, very loud one, and to some extent, one he probably thought he would be very justified in following through, and he went full on and bombed a sovereign country, even if you dislike it. It is a sovereign country. It was a bomb. It wasn't interference. And he went 3 attacks, and then he stopped, right? So a bully would continue bombing. He stopped. He is much more deliberate than we give him credit. So the moment we start underestimating his rationality and at least his strategic angle in negotiation is the moment we start actually losing. The moment we just calling him a bully is the moment we start actually losing the chance to convince him. I actually tend to tell this a lot to people in my class. If you say that someone is a bully, irrational, or stupid, you already lost, because if they are bully, irrational, stupid, what you're telling yourself is there's nothing I can do to convince them. So I'm going to have to do what they tell me to do. The moment you start to understand that a lot of what seems to be a bully, irrational, or stupid is actually a strategic negotiation move with their own intrinsic logic, then it becomes your task to understand that logic and come up with intelligent moves to handle that. And so that's what we argue in our article. So I would invite you to look. It's in Substack. So you can look for literally how to negotiate with Trump and win with me and my colleague, Rodrigo Gouveia.
So let's take that. Let's make this the last question. Let's take it to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, from international relationships and warfare and bombing down to a garden variety mediation that we might see in the United States with hard bargainers. The plaintiff comes in and they're from one culture, plaintiff's lawyer, contingent fee lawyers, one culture, person, they're demanding millions of dollars for a claim that is worth nowhere near that much. On the other side, you have an insurance company very different culture, very different temperament on average, right?
Yeah.
And they're offering peanuts to settle a case that may not be worth the sun and the moon, but certainly is worth more than peanuts. And
That's
here we are as the mediators trying to help people bridge that gap. Where do you recommend we start?
Oof. So if I were to follow the model, just as I said, intention, rituals, preferences, just as a refresher of what I just said. In that particular case, it depends a bit on which mediation approach you're using and what is your goal as a mediator. Are you just trying to solve the conflict? Are you trying to reestablish relationships? Are you planning to go for a facilitative or evaluative mediation? Are you going to do a shuttle diplomacy exercise, or are you going to actually have them in the room the whole time? Are you discussing with the parties, or with the parties and lawyers, or just with the lawyers? So I know you're a professional mediator and a successful one at that. So I'm sure that all this intro of mine was basic, but just for the benefit of the group. In that case, what I would argue is the more transactional it is, the more you're just talking to the lawyers, there's no need for future relationships and things of sorts, the more the intention becomes a bit more apparent, but you can literally just ask. A lot of the times you can figure out intentions by asking about interests. And so by just asking what are the true interests of the party, you can start triangulating a bit more what the intention is. And at some point, if people start to behave in ways that seem to be inconsistent with the voiced interests, then you can start challenging the intention behind it in a positive way. It's like, help me understand, you're saying you're looking to find a deal quickly and easily, but you keep on anchoring high or you keep on anchoring low, which we both know is a tactic to take advantage of the other side's biases. So you as an experienced negotiator and understanding of the negotiation process with mediators, professional mediators are, you will start showing and explicitating the incongruences of people's moves, and therefore helping people have a conversation about intentions and making it hard for the liars that might be in the room, just for opportunistic liars, not saying chronic, but opportunistic liars that are trying to just get a little edge and who think that the ethical line for good negotiation is a little bit further than it should be. Then you create that conversation there. And the point is that sometimes in mediations, it's hard for you to do a ritual exercise. But I think that the process of negotiation, by explaining how to go about it and really emphasizing a ritual where you do people in the room looking at each other, having to listen, take notes, play back what they heard to show that they're listening to one another, that also helps create relationship and a process of understanding, as opposed to just a shuttle exercise where you're literally just focusing on the substance. So the choice of rituals also will make a big difference in approximating or not, depending again on the goals of the mediation. Jeff, I don't know if I'm answering your question. We could go in more.
You are very, 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 very helpful. And, we see that all the time. For example, if I'm doing a trust and estate mediation between siblings or relatives, a second wife and children of the first marriage is a typical paradigm. People have relatives in common or business partnership where they expect a relationship to continue. That's going to look a lot different. And perhaps people need to have much more direct interaction because it is a much more future-oriented situation than way at the other end of the spectrum. You have two people who've never met each other, and their cars had a collision in an intersection, and you're figuring out how much money has to change hands, and those people will likely never see each other again. Different kind of process may be warranted. Professor Horacio Falcao, this has been one of our most stimulating presentations in the 5 years.
You say this to everyone. That's so nice.
Thank you so much. And I know that I'll be contributing to our local food bank here in Los Angeles, California. I hope that other people will be contributing to their local food banks wherever they live, or food banks that are otherwise important to them. On behalf of the team here at the Will Work for Food Project, thank you so much, Professor. And with that, we are complete.
Thank you, and congratulations on your beautiful project. Thanks for having me, and wishing you a wonderful day. Feel free to pin me or get in touch. I'll be more than glad to continue the conversation. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.